Hey, this is Jonathan from the Body of Evidence. Today I want to talk about what scientists do. There was a poll in the UK that revealed that about 20% of the individuals who were polled said that they didn't know what scientists did in their everyday life. There was another poll about public attitudes to science that also showed that actually most people don't know the processes that scientists go through. So, what about you? Do you know what a senior scientist, a lead investigator, an actual researcher does in his or her everyday life? I'll give you a few seconds to think about it. So, any answer? It turns out that American scientists, for instance, spend 42% of their time doing bureaucratic chores. Which is probably surprising to a lot of people. Of course, what is a little known fact about scientific research is that it's less about doing science and it's more about running a small business. And we can do a whole, and maybe I'll do another video at some point about how scientists are woefully unprepared to run a small business. But essentially, it involves managing a budget, managing human resources, and begging for money. The way that scientific research works is that a researcher will need to apply for a grant. A grant is what an organism that has a lot of money that want to fund research will give to a researcher when that researcher has applied through a process known as a grant application. So you apply for a grant by submitting a very detailed idea of what it is that you want to accomplish in your research project and why you need that kind of money. So you will do an in-depth literature review on your topic. You will spell out your hypotheses, your scientific protocol, how you're going to go about finding out the things you want to find out about, who your collaborators are, why are they qualified to do this, a detailed budget, what are all the things you're going to buy, who's going to be on your staff being paid from this money, letters of support from your institution, the whole package. And you submit this to an agency in the context of a competition. This is looked at, it's evaluated by other researchers who are part of the process as well. They do a peer review process on this. And the organism, depending on how much money they have, will fund a certain percentage of these applications, the ones with the highest scores. Now, some grants are even more complicated than this because before you can submit the grant itself, you have to submit a letter of intent. You have to tell the organism, I intend to submit a grant application as part of your competition. Here's a brief summary of what I want to do. If your letter of intent is approved, then you move on to the second phase and you put together a more detailed grant application. Now, this process is very time consuming. And in order to find some data on this, I stumbled upon a paper coming out of Australia in 2013 where the authors took a very detailed look at how much money and time was being, quote, wasted doing this process of applying for grants. And the numbers are very, very interesting. So at the time, so they looked at one particular federal body that was funding biomedical research in Australia. So this is only a fraction of the research that is being done in Australia. And at the time, the success rate was 21%, which means that 21% of the grant proposals that were sent to this organism were financed. The rest were not. The authors calculated that to put together one proposal, so one researcher putting together one proposal, would take 38 days of that proposal, of that researcher's time. Think about this. This is 38 days. It's well over a month full time of putting together a demand begging for money. This was for a new proposal, so a brand new proposal. Researcher has a new idea that's never been proposed before. He or she has never submitted it before. 38 days. Sometimes, oftentimes, your proposal is rejected. And you may find a way to repackage it, to recycle parts of it and submit it to a different agency or to the same agency the next year during a different competition. So in that case, it would take, on average, they calculated 28 days to put together this repackaged grant proposal. So we're talking in the neighborhood of a full month of full-time work to put together a proposal. That's a lot of time. And when you total this for all of the Australian researchers who participated in that particular competition that year, the annual cost of the process itself is 66 million Australian dollars, which is a lot of money. So a lot of money is being spent begging for money, and most of these people were not funded. The last competition that we had here in Canada for the equivalent organization that funds biomedical research at the federal level, the success rate was not 21%, but it was closer to 15%. So even more of the grant proposals that were submitted were not funded. And I just have to read from, there's a study that came out of Canada in 2009, and it talks about a different funding agency in Canada, which is called NSERC. It's the Natural Science and Engineering Research Council of Canada. And the title itself is quite telling. The title is Cost of the NSERC Science Grant Peer Review System Exceeds the Cost of Giving Every Qualified Researcher a Baseline Grant. Kid you not. So as I was mentioning before, when you submit a grant, the grant has to be evaluated so that the organization can decide whether to fund it or not. So there's a peer review system. So you have your peers, other researchers who are part of this process, and they will evaluate these things. So what they calculated was that the cost of reviewing these applications was greater than simply giving a grant to everybody who applied. So I just want to read a little bit from the abstract because it's absurd. Using statistics from NSERC, we show that the $40,000 Canadian dollar cost of preparation for a grant application and rejection by peer review in 2007 exceeded that of giving every qualified investigator a direct baseline discovery grant of $30,000, which was the average grant at the time. This means the Canadian federal government could institute direct grants for 100% of qualified applicants for the same money. Now you may say, if that were the case, if we would stop having this level of quality control at the level of begging for money, anybody would just apply for this and we would run out of money. People would just throw themselves into science because they would know they would get funded. What the authors are arguing is that there are other levels of quality control that take care of this. For instance, control of quality is assured through university hiring. Universities don't hire anybody. Promotion and tenure proceedings, journal reviews of submitted work, and the patent process, whose collective scrutiny far exceeds that of grant peer review. So I found that very, very interesting. Now, reading about this and reading blog posts about this and comments on these stories, I have to be honest, some researchers, especially some younger researchers, say that they like the process. They like the fact that sitting down to write a grant, even though it takes a lot of time, it forces them to really think about their ideas, to think about them scientifically, to come up with a methodology, to do the scientific, to do the review of the literature, and they like this. They like this part of the process. And it is part of science. I mean, you have an idea, but you can't just throw yourself at the idea. You have to think about it carefully and see what is your hypothesis and how can you refute your hypothesis and what do you need to do and what is the minimum amount of work that you can do to refute that hypothesis. But other people were writing op-eds saying this is a disgrace and so much time is being wasted on this. I want to do science and this is not science, it's a bureaucratic chore. So a lot of ink has been spilled on this process of how researchers will ask for money, and that is how they spend a good chunk of their time. In some cases it's a third of their time, maybe it's half of their time, but it's certainly a large portion of the time that is spent by researchers. So I hope this was illuminating to you. I hope you learned something new about how science really works. And I hope that the next time that you see a picture in a newspaper or online about a new discovery and there's a picture of the lead researcher, the lead author on this, who's wearing a lab coat and who's in the lab and who's holding a pipette and he's looking like he's doing actual, what we call bench work or wet lab experiments, that you realize that this probably does not happen in real life. Some student is doing this, some research technician or assistant is doing this. What this guy or this woman is doing in their everyday life is they're sitting in their office without a lab coat, at their computer, and they're begging for money.